The biggest piece of advice that can be given to any aspiring writer is to read a lot and to consume a ton of media in general. Only by seeing hundreds of permutations of plot, characters, world building, and themes can you develop a sense of what you'd like to at first emulate, then iterate upon, and then develop into your own fully fledged story. This is something pretty much everyone in this space knows, but the topic we're going to be addressing today on JBAT is what do you read and watch? How much is enough? Are you a failure if you haven't read every classic novel written since 1850? This may come as a shock to you, but my answer to that last question is probably not going to be yes. But anyway, we're gonna start things off with part 1, exposure to ideas. So this first part of the video is just gonna be a little discussion on what this topic even is if that hasn't been made clear yet. This video may be a little scatterbrained, but I promise you I'm onto something. There is, for all intents and purposes, infinite media out there. You could spend every waking moment of your life from now until you die at 83 reading, watching, and playing every single thing you can get your hands on, and you'd never even scratch the surface of everything that's out there. Because new stuff is getting released all the time. This is the nature of art and creativity. Countless people throw their work out into the vast ocean of media. Some of it floats, some of it sinks, but you're never going to get to all of it. Some of those that float, we then go on to collectively place a lot of value in, and thus tell other people swimming in this great ocean of stuff to go find and experience it. These are your War and Peaces, your Shawshank Redemptions, your Fallout New Vegases, or what have you. There's already sort of an obligation as the average person who isn't interested in creating art of their own to have seen or played a number of these things. Probably something like a majority of people in the Western world would be surprised to hear somebody hadn't seen at least one Star Wars movie at some point in their life. And a book snob might scoff at someone who hasn't read any Cormac McCarthy, and so on and so forth. Everybody's got different standards. Part of my argument with this video is that these sorts of people are, not really worth listening to. There are so many pieces of media out there that even the most well-read people on the planet could be presented with a curated list of classic works that they just happen to have not read, and it would make them look like an uncultured fool who's never experienced anything at all. It's a toxic way to engage with people, obviously. That being said, there is a lot of value underlining the conversation in that, especially if you are a creative, you should be actively seeking out media that will better your craft, and that's what a lot of the rest of this video is going to be about. So to hit on the section title, a great reason for that is exposure to ideas. A good story can really change someone's life. Any creative knows this. We all have some piece of media that fundamentally reshaped the way we thought about the world, and we all know, even if we don't think about, the fact that often a good piece of media is a far better argument for ideas we disagree with than any discussion or debate or whatever it could possibly hope to be. Nobody is almost ever convinced of anything by an argument or a debate, which is something known by everyone except those who start arguments. But a story that conveys challenging ideas in engaging ways is far more likely to get one to think about the world in a way that was contrary to their previous conceptions. Exposure to ideas is also important because it is the best cure against the biggest problem every novice writer, yes you either had this or have this, and I did too, possesses. The problem is the boiled chicken with no spices problem, which is to say that there is a stage when you want to start writing but still haven't been exposed to all that much media that you've thought about critically. Most of the time because you're young and weren't really sentient until relatively recently, and sometimes because you weren't into writing until recently and thus are now watching and rewatching things or reading and rereading things with a newfound critical eye. So because at this stage all you have is the thing you really like that inspired you to write, which you have, and not much else to pull from, you make the boiled chicken with no spices, which is to say a bland copy of the thing you like that doesn't really stand on its own merit. You shouldn't feel bad about making this because it's an important step in learning how to write, especially when you come to realize that something you made is this. Then, through exposure to ideas and critically analyzing other pieces of media, you finally add spices to the cabinet and put that chicken on a grill instead of boiling it. You might even add some side dishes through implementing your own takes on themes from other things you've seen that you really liked, and eventually you'll end up with a full meal. I'm realizing now that I use food analogies a lot. I think I need to stop writing these scripts when I'm hungry. In any case, that is the core concept here. Why is it important to go out of your way to engage with good media? Because not only might you enjoy it, but if you're paying attention to that media, you'll get better at writing through sheer osmosis. It's almost magical. However, for those among us in the writing world, I have something for you that isn't quite magical, but is very useful when you need to organize your writing project, and that is today's sponsor, World Anvil. JBat here to talk to you about World Anvil once again, because World Anvil's pretty cool, and so are the people that run it, I know now. But as we all know, writing is complicated, world building is complicated, and that's especially true when you're working with genres like sci-fi, fantasy, really anything in the speculative fiction world is pretty complex. Keeping all of that information organized is a nightmare. But World Anvil has got your back. If you need templates to keep track of character information, World Anvil's got it. If you need an interactive map so you can develop the unique personality of every location, World Anvil can do that. If you need a template for a magic system, World Anvil can also do that thing too. World Anvil can even help you with the very nebulous and complex topic of the timeline, which, considering that some of us like to do multi-thousand-year timelines, is pretty good. All put together, World Anvil is great for giving you that wiki vibe where all of your world building is part of one solid ecosystem. So if World Anvil sounds like the answer to your writing and world building needs, check them out at worldanvil.com and use the coupon code JBAT for a 51% off discount on any annual membership. That's worldanvil.com, which will be linked in the description below. Use code JBAT for 51% off a yearly membership. Thank you to World Anvil for sponsoring this video, and thank you for not skipping the ad. You didn't do that, right? But all this brings us to part 2. What do you look for? So you need to expose yourself to more media. What media? Well, there are 2 general trains of thought here that should be pretty obvious, but do demand a bit of discussion. The first train of thought is to experience your genre. Basically the whole, if you're gonna write horror, read horror line. If you're gonna write romance, read it. It's a pretty simple idea, and one that people, I would say, are more inclined to already be doing, because why would you be wanting to write in a genre you don't like reading or watching? But, aha, that's a trick question. There are some reasons, and that's where the inversion of this otherwise very straightforward section comes, and I'll use myself as an example. At the moment, I'm mostly writing fantasy and horror. On horror, I don't have that much to say on this topic. I'm reading horror, I'm watching horror, I'm playing horror. I like it, so I'm experiencing it, and thus learning what kinds of horror I do like and don't like. What things the genre does that I'm cool with sticking with conventions on, which ones I don't, are all things that I'm working out. Turns out I like supernatural and cosmic horror, but I'm not that big on slashers, and comedy horror just kind of gets a shrug from me. But with fantasy, things were a little different. There aren't a ton of good fantasy movies, and though there are the Lord of the Rings movies, I've also read the books, so I don't know that that even counts. But aside from those, most of the fantasy I've found and connected with has just sort of happened to be in the realm of video games. But I'm not a writer for video games. I wouldn't be against it, but it's just not what I'm doing. I like writing novels, and I like reading them too, but generally I'm not that big a fan of what's coming out in the fantasy genre in this moment. No big overarching reason, just happen to not be all that into it. I mean, for example, you guys have seen me before, know that I couldn't really get into Sanderson. So this whole thing gives us 2 interesting subtopics. What do you do if you don't like the subgenre you write in the medium you're writing in? And how do you translate concepts you like from one medium to another when they are used differently across said mediums? So for the first, my main example to pull from is that the piece of media that made me really come to love fantasy was Fire Emblem Three Houses, and then the setting of Warhammer Fantasy got me into it as well. And though that was in part through books, it was also through games. So I liked fantasy games, but not fantasy books as much, but wanted to write fantasy books. Is that a problem? Not necessarily. Now, obviously I would say that because it's what I did, but I do think you can pull it off. Not as easily as if I wasn't going across mediums, but this is where we get to answering that second question. How do you translate across mediums? So, say you've got the opposite situation of me and you're reading a book that you love and you want to take some ideas from it for a game you're making. Because, as we all know, good writers borrow and great writers steal. In this hypothetical case, what you need to do is consciously bear in mind the types of scenes in the book that you know couldn't have an equivalent in the game. Long descriptions of visuals that would be made completely moot by the game's graphics are easy to write off. But what about tastes and smells and the feelings of physical touch? Do you narrate them, convey them through facial expressions? How do you go about it? When you read several page-long dialogue diatribes in a book, think about how that would translate in a game. Would it be too long for a cutscene? Would it need some visual intrigue, stuff actually happening to keep it interesting, which really you probably should do in books too? Or do you think that the content would be gripping enough to keep the player engaged? These are things to consider. I had it the other way around. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, to keep with that example, there are all sorts of ideas you could not put in a book. There are discussions between side characters with only those side characters present all the time. And they work as a gameplay mechanic, but in a book, if you are changing POV all the time to have these quirky side conversations, it would be confusing at best and infuriating in all likelihood. All the extra little battles you fight every month in Fire Emblem to grind up levels on your weaker characters would not be in a novel, because that's just not how novels work. I'm sure there are exceptions, but, you know, generally. Time is spent differently between games and novels, obviously, and a 30-hour game and a 30-hour novel are going to contain different balances of dialogue, plot, character, action, whatever. Movies might contrast books by being condensed and shorter, but with the benefit of visuals and audio, whereas games might be every bit as long, if not way longer than books, but less of that time is likely to be spent on directly being about the plot and characters. These are all things to keep in mind when translating even concepts between mediums, because those concepts are inherently wrapped up in the medium that they're a part of. So bear in mind context when it comes to pulling from your inspirations, of course, and if the media you're gathering ideas from is indeed in a different medium than the one you plan to work with. And now we can finally circle back around to the other train of thought for what media to expose yourself to. That being the nebulously defined term of classics. Classic is a very interesting term because it is indeterminate and impermanent, and some things that are definitely classics are not as good as things that definitely aren't classics. Not to mention us living somewhere in the ballpark of 200 years after the introduction of mass market novels, there are 2 centuries worth of classics to catch up on, and many get sort of forgotten. I mean, take All the King's Men, a novel my dad's generation knew pretty well, and that I'd say is easily one of the best written novels that I've read. But at some point over the last few decades, it's just sort of fallen out of people's minds. Not mine, I made a 4-hour video about it because I'm crazy, but it's there. I'm reading Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose right now, and it is proven to be beyond phenomenal, and yet I had no idea it even existed until it was recommended to me, even though there was apparently an also good movie made about it in the 60s or 70s, I think. Which, of course, this whole thing could lead into a point about how surrounding yourself with other well-read people is going to be good because they'll give you quality media to look at, because I didn't find All the King's Men by myself either. But the point is that there are a lot of classics out there. And here I'd say the point in experiencing them is that there's value in getting through them even if they have nothing to do with your story, because what they do have to do with your story is being damn good or at least influential, which is pretty important, and the main thing people who only read in their genre for inspiration will lack insight from. And in case I have the need to say this, classics are not inherently boring. A lot of them are really interesting and hold up. Check some out. Now, some genres may only have a dozen odd truly great novels, which is a lot, maybe even a high estimation sometimes. But when you run out of them and start reading stuff in your genre just because it's in your genre, even though it's not that good, that might be a sign to branch out and search for more of the truly magnificent. Even if you don't do it all the time, just going out of your way on occasion to get something really good that you wouldn't read otherwise, and getting some fresh perspective can be really helpful. I'm never going to write anything that is qualitatively like All the King's Men, or at least I don't have any plans to, but I can still feel the way that it's influenced the way I write. But to summarize this portion of the video, experience everything. Get something from every genre. Even if it's from not the medium that you're working with, your genre is important, but returning to that sea of classics to find stuff that's just great regardless of genre is just going to be great. It's not going to lead you astray. But this leads us into our final portion, part 3, cultural literacy. This is a favorite term of mine because of the sorts of things it can lead you to discovering. But cultural literacy, to briefly summarize, is being aware of the ins and outs and great detail of the culture in which you live. It's the ability to pick up on allusions and references even when they're vague and non-specific, and when used well, These illusions, when you find them, can do some crazy magic. To demonstrate that, I'm going to give you an example that kind of blew my mind several years ago. So William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury is probably one of the most difficult to read novels I've ever gotten through. Several of the perspectives are from people who are not mentally equipped in one way or another to objectively describe their situation, and if you think the novel's events are portrayed in a way that is in any way consecutive or chronological, then you have another thing coming. All the same, it is pretty incredible, not least because I came out the other end more or less understanding what happened, with a little help, but because of something it did. Because among all of the intrigue of this novel, the thing I want to focus on is something that would be an absolute throwaway scene in basically any other story, or that, if I wasn't told about it, would have seemed like throwaway. But first, a little scene setting so you know kind of what I'm talking about. The novel centers on the Compson family living in the fictional Yoknapatawpha County in Mississippi. It is, to vastly oversimplify, a story about the dissolution of this family and the loss of Caddy Compson, the family's daughter, as she disappears at a certain point and is never seen again after being thought to engage in things that an upright Southern family would not approve of. Early, chronologically in the novel, she's outside and a frog jumps across her path and into the grass. That's it. That's the scene we're talking about. This stupid amphibian is a multi-layered reference to the snake in the Garden of Eden. So, in John Milton's Paradise Lost, one of the forms Satan takes while trying to infiltrate the Garden of Eden is a toad. This, of course, brings us to the Garden of Eden itself, and the idea of Satan crossing Eden's path and leading her to eat from the tree and condemn man to the original sin and all of that. And we're supposed to get that intuitively because a frog jumps across Caddy's path one day, and thus understand that one day she is going to fall to temptation and leave the family and ruin the Garden of Eden that is the Compson family household, and that's what the novel's about, because a frog jumps across a path. So that's what cultural literacy is. I did not figure that out by myself, by the way, obviously. I'm not that smart. But that is one reason that you should try to be well-read, so that maybe you can figure it out yourself. It'll obviously depend on what culture that it is you come from or are prioritizing learning about, but there are going to be hidden references to things like this in almost all great works. You can bet your bottom dollar that any great novel written in the generally Christian-ish world is going to have Bible allegories, be they direct or subtle, even from authors that are not consciously writing from a religious perspective. And that's just because of how deeply some of those ideas are embedded in that culture. Of course, whether you choose to try and do these things yourself is up to you, but this is the level to which being well-read can benefit you. It unlocks a whole new level of engaging with media that before it you'll have had no idea of, and after it you will start to see literally everywhere. And honestly, with that, I think we've basically exhausted my thoughts on this topic, or multiple topics. Really, it is kind of multiple topics, but whatever, it's my video, I can do what I want. I feel like this might have been a little all over the place, but I hope it was at least mostly coherent, or that at least something of value got through to you in any case. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts of your own about being cultured, I read every comment and would love to see them. In addition, every like and subscription goes a long way. We also have a Discord if you want to hang out with my editor and I, and a Patreon if you're crazy enough to want it, where we post all our videos a week early. On that note, I'd like to thank our patrons, Shadowrunner, Sawney, and Isaac Parrott, our Knights of the Inner Circle, Nico, our Knight, and Greer, our loyal squire. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and remember, I no longer trust frogs in novels, and neither should you.